there's also another important issue. On Sunday, it was reported that power generation dipped to 916 megawatts with only 2 out of about 24 power plants in operation. The decline in generation was from 3,787.60 megawatts that 17 power plants produced at about 1 p.m. on that day. Meanwhile, Association of Power Generation Companies attributed the decline in production to grid disturbance. The unending conversation of electricity generation and distribution in Nigeria, it seems, we will always have something to talk about. That's why we have Mr. George Etomi in the studio, the chairman, West Power and Gas. Good morning, Mr. Etomi. Thank you so much. We tried to have this conversation virtually 2 weeks ago, and we couldn't conclude because of network. So it's good to have you in the studio.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
So before we go into power, no, okay, you guys are the big guys, so you have the new notes everywhere, I guess.
I think this new notes business is a leveler. I don't even know the big people who have the new notes.
Well, we are all in this together.
Absolutely.
All right, so on Sunday, not so long ago, we saw a dip. And we always hear grid collapse and grid collapse. Thank God you are here. You've been in this industry for many, many years now. So even though you are from the distribution end, you should be able to help us paint a picture.
Yeah.
You know, when we hear grid collapse, what is that about, really?
Grid collapse, grid disturbance. What it simply means is that the grid, which is essentially the element that transports electricity after it has been generated, it's not having either enough electricity or too much of it to balance its ability to then send it to distribution companies. And that can happen if, for example, there are gas constraints, if you don't have enough gas, so it means the generating companies cannot generate enough. If you have too much, it strains the capacity of the grid to wheel it. Either way, it creates disturbance. And once there's disturbance, you begin to ramp down. The systems operator begins to call on distribution companies to run down. In other words, switch off certain areas so that you create, you do not allow for a total collapse. Now, beyond a certain threshold, if the amount of power coming in isn't enough, then the grid collapses. And
so either way, either high or low.
If it's too high or it's too low. So that's why what they do at all times is to ensure that there is a grid balance. Once that balance is not attained and there's a disturbance, I'm sure in some cases, I'm sure there are homes where you have power come on 10 minutes, it goes off, comes back 30 minutes, goes off. That's when there's that disturbance.
So it's not like somebody switching it off and on?
It's not as straightforward as switch on and off, but yes, it is just a way of ensuring that the grid does not collapse. So you just think about your generator, 60 kVA generator, then you put on so many appliances. If it goes beyond what that generator can, you know what goes and starts fluctuating, it starts going deep in and everything, and then you quickly go and switch off one or two gadgets, and then you now maintain some kind of stability. When you feel it can power it, the more you go back that way. So it's essentially the way it works. But I think what we should be looking at is that, why should this be happening? And it is happening because the gas companies that essentially supply power to the generating companies, because 80% of the power electricity we get today are from thermal plants. And those are your huge thermal plants you have all over the place. Egbin, Olorunshogo, all these big plants. They all depend on gas as their feedstock. But unfortunately, because of issues to do with gas pricing, poor infrastructure, gas to power infrastructure, because I think in our model for electricity, we didn't really think about gas to power. We were more interested in gas for export. That's why you don't hear complaints about the LNG exports. So now that we have those constraints, the gas companies do not feel encouraged to supply gas to the generating companies because they are being owed. Because they're being owed. And when that happens, the generating companies themselves have to ramp down. You have, like Egbe has 6 turbines, 4 are contracted to the national grid. And then there's gas constraint. They shut down 2 just to protect the plants. So that's the reason. So when people, what we need to understand it so that we can begin to tackle the fundamental issue of gas to power, because that's what holds the key. Now, I'm not saying there are no problems in the entire value chain. We can discuss those ones later. But this is the fundamental one. It needs to be dealt with.
Okay, so who is supposed to deal with this gas? Because I know that even recently, because of the Ukraine war, Europe is looking to countries like Nigeria for gas, this same gas.
This is the irony of our situation. We don't have any problem with our gas exports. All the gas infrastructure is built for export. You have all the big producing companies, they're the same ones, the big boys, the Shells, the ExxonMobils. They produce the gas, they take it to Soku, that's the gas gathering facility. It is piped to Bonny, and from there it is liquefied and then shipped abroad. We don't have that problem, and the government is earning good dividends from that, which is good, but that's one separate business. But then what about your gas for domestic use? Now, to encourage gas for export, for example, I told you about pricing. The price at which gas is given for export is far lower than what it is given for domestic consumption.
Lower?
Yes, because the government tries to regulate the price. They try to encourage export, but you must also begin to look at what you can do internally.
So is it a matter of pricing for domestic? Is it a matter of pricing or a matter of infrastructure?
Both. For example, gas prices are regulated. I think today it's about $3.80, benchmark with international pricing. The gas producers tell you that it costs them about $6.60. So they have absolutely no incentive to give it to you. So that's why I said those contracts are on a best endeavor basis. So they give it to you. So the government still takes it and therefore owes them. And this backlog is part of the reason from time to time.
Is this the $1 trillion debts that they talk about?
Naira, you mean?
Naira, yes.
Yeah, it's all rolled in because the generating companies too also have their own element of debt because they generate. You are meant to pay them for not just the raw power they generate, but for the capacity, because they also have a capacity to generate more than they are doing. But because of these constraints we're talking about, they can generate, but it cannot be taken by transmission. You're supposed to pay for both.
Is it possible to have a totally privatized power sector? From this gas to the generation, and then of course we already have the distribution, we don't even know what's going on.
Yeah, but no, let me say totally, as in let the government totally hands off. That can happen, but it will be over time, because it's just like with your petroleum subsidy. You want to wind down slowly, because the key to all of this is the tariff at the other end, which is what concerns the average consumer. So if you allow for market forces to determine pricing, those tariffs could go totally out of whack. So the idea of the government intervening by way of controlling the prices is to make sure the end user tariffs are manageable. But that brings the subsidy element into it. And we know in Nigeria, subsidy has not been well managed. And that is why when the privatization, the gradual privatization, which is the way to go, started, one of the conditions for the investment was that you would allow for cost-reflective tariffs.
Which we are still struggling
Which you are still struggling with, because that's what truly attracts investments. Because the investments you require in the energy sector is massive, really massive. And that money is not here. It's going to come from investors who see a clear path to recovering those investments. And one of those things is don't distort the markets.
All right, Mr. Itomi, I have to tell you this, that a lot of Nigerians are still angry with you guys, that you secretly increase the it's still a conversation that's ongoing. If you check on Twitter and every other place, that you secretly increase the tariff without their knowledge, and they just recharge their cards and discover that tariff.
I believe I apologized on behalf of the discos when the last time we spoke, because you did give the advice that if you are going to increase, the least you can do is just send out messages. And that point has been taken, and I hope going forward that will be done. But in terms of the fundamentals, to keep market confidence, to honor contracts, you must begin to move the market in the direction that it was originally conceived to go. And one of these is the correction, the price correction. And that is why I told you there are two models under the MITO for regulating tariffs. You have the major review, which is once every 5 years. Because based on representations from the discos and the public hearings and co, the regulator anticipates over a 5-year period where the tariffs will go. But in between, every 6 months, just to look at market realities, because of course you have foreign exchange fluctuations like me and you see, you have inflation, you have other things. Those adjustments are made. Because electricity, like with any other commodity, yields to market pressure. I mean, today you went to buy a cup of gari for 10 naira. Tomorrow you go, it's 15 and all that. You don't blame the woman. She's responding to the market pressure. So the principle is the same. But what you want to do is to ensure that market confidence is maintained so that investments continue to flow in. And why do we say that? Ultimately, when the investments come in and the system corrects itself, there's competition. Competition always drives down prices. We saw that in telecoms. I always remind people when telecoms came to even get a handset, recall 200K, 50K. SIM cards was another story. Tariff, there was a time we were told, oh, you could not do per second billing, it had to be per minute and all sorts of things. But what did the regulator? There was pressure at the time from the public. No, don't allow. The regulator stood firm, stayed by the contract. And it was just like, look, you guys calm down. And what did that do? It brought in more investments. And as the big players came in, competition started. Today they beg you to come and get SIM card. They're giving you all sorts of offerings. That's where we'll be moving to. I can understand the impatience with electricity because it impacts directly on your happiness. I mean, once you don't have power, it just affects your mood and all that. So I guess that's why many consumers are not happy. But truth be told, we must stay the course, we must stay the path so that we can begin to move away from this subsidy regime. It's subsidies, whether it's power, whether it's petrol or whatever, that's brought us where we are. And look at your national debt, 77 trillion.
Yes.
I don't envy anybody who's coming into power after
Mr. Tommy, we're out of time, but we can't help but talk about the metering, because this is one way of assuring the consumers that you're actually just paying for what you consume. People talk of crazy bills and things like that. We've had maps. That's supposed to be a policy that is supposed to help spread metering, but we still have a lot of Nigerians and a lot of stories in the process of acquiring the metering.
Yes. The metering, I think, as I've mentioned to you before, it's what creates trust between the distribution companies and the consumer, and really must be given priority. And right from inception, the metering rollout has been steady. Many people will not understand it, but when the companies were initially privatized, information was very difficult to get. The system, the old NEPA was manually driven. It was just difficult to get information. Nobody even knew what the metering gap was. They give you numbers, 12 million, 20 million, you don't even know. And so by the time most of this, as we're now seeing, the systems are being now automated, you're beginning to get that number. So there's aggressive metering going on, but it's just that the demand far outstrips the supply. But that's not an excuse for bad behavior. I mean, you shouldn't let customers go through a lot of hiccups, because there's been a lot of support for metering. And like you said, there are maps and so many other programs in place. But that will be a steady one, because if it's good news to the consumers, the regulator has put a cap on estimated bills. So it would be silly for a disco to rely on estimated bills instead of properly metering, because there's a limit. If you go beyond it, the consumer has a right to report you and you'll be sanctioned. So for even the discos, you don't need to beg them anymore. They want to actually meet our customers.
Well, Nigerians will ask if that's a system that brings about the sanction is actually effective.
It is. Just know your rights. Just know your rights and press for it.
All right, Mr. George Etomi, thank you so much for coming all the way to the studio this morning, Chairman, West Power and Gas. And we will hold you to your promise that you will communicate more with us as consumers.
I'm not in the distribution business, but I'll advise them. We'll advise them.
All right, thank you so much for your time this morning.
My pleasure.
Okay.